Since the beginning of time, humanity has had but one simple question on their mind. Who is the best character in the hit visual novel series, Your Turn to Die? Many people have tried to answer this question, but to no avail. The task of trying to categorize and rank such a complex cast of characters would take an absolute madman to do. If only there was someone who was brave enough to try and complete an entire tier list of the Your Turn to Die characters. Before we get into it, let's set some ground rules. I'm ranking the cast of Your Turn to Die characters based on their contributions to the story and my overall impressions on them. Now it's important to note that this is purely just my opinion, so there's no need to brandish your pitchforks if I rank your character lower than you would have liked. Characters will be ranked from S tier to F tier, and I'll only be covering the main cast of the series, so we won't get characters like Meister or Megumi, as we don't know nearly enough about them to give them a proper ranking. I also won't be covering Jin or Toko from the Your Time to Shine series, as, let's be honest, if I hadn't said their names right now, you would have forgotten who they were. Well, without any further ado, let's begin ranking. Oh, by the way, there will be spoilers up to Chapter 3.1b. Ah yes, the main character of the game. As far as main characters go, this is one of the best written ones that I've seen. Depending on how the player wants to play the game, she can either be a concerned survivor or an absolute goofball, which is refreshing to see. In this game, most of the cast loves Sarah, and for good reason. She's caring, kind, and yet somehow has the strength to challenge her allies and antagonists when she needs to. Her friendship with Joe is one of the best friendships I've ever seen portrayed in any media. It feels extremely organic and based on trust between the two. This makes the hallucination arc hit that much harder when this amazing friendship is used against her, but it allows her to connect deeper with her emotions and to the other characters surrounding her by allowing her to help her get through it. Sarah being so in touch with her emotions allows her to be an amazing protagonist, truly earning the title of Samurai Woman. She absolutely deserves an A tier ranking. Oh my god, I love Joe so much. If it isn't apparent from the fact that I literally have a framed poster of the guy, I think Joe is an incredibly well-written character. Joe is an incredibly fun and charismatic character who acts as your sidekick throughout the entire of Chapter 1. Joe's personality riffs off of Sarah's perfectly, creating an iconic duo throughout the death game. Whenever Joe's on screen, you can always rely on a good time, as he tries his absolute best to keep the mood positive, even during the worst of times. There's a noticeable difference in the tone of the game when he's not only gone, but when Hallucination Joe appears, as it completely shifts the dynamic between Sarah and Joe. Despite Sarah's struggles with Hallucination Joe, Joe is there to help Sarah even after death in the form of an artificial intelligence. By the way, don't even get me started on this scene, I was so damn close to crying. Because of this, he absolutely at the very least deserves an A tier ranking. The resident catboy of the series. Jin is the youngest character in the game at only 12 years old, and he's always acting in high spirits, referring to the other participants as Big Bro or Big Sis. He has multiple characters that could be considered his father figures, which brings a lot of the cast together, especially during hard times. Jin likes to try and prove his worth to the rest of the cast, which makes him a massive help throughout the story. He doesn't like to be treated as a kid, and he often tries to make decisions to lighten the burden on Sarah that's constantly handed to her throughout the entire game. A quirk that Jin has is that he'll always add a woof or a meow onto whatever he says, which makes him stand out at first, but it tends to get repetitive quite quickly, especially during the more serious moments, though this is mostly overshadowed by his personality. Considering this, Jin gets a B ranking. Keiji is an incredibly mysterious dude, and he'll do anything to keep it that way. Don't be fooled, however, his mysteriousness isn't to hide a lack of an actual character. At the beginning of the game, you know absolutely nothing about Keiji, but as you go chapter by chapter, you slowly get to learn bits and pieces about his history and why he acts the way he does. The father role he plays for Sarah is strange to see at first when you don't know his motives, but as you learn more about how he experiences the same hallucinations that Sarah does, and his childhood, you understand why he's so protective of Sarah and why he wants to push her to succeed. Watching Keiji get more comfortable with the rest of the cast and slowly opening up while also gelling with each character in their own way is incredibly satisfying to watch. Keiji absolutely deserves an A ranking. Probably one of the most accurate portrayals of an art student, Nao is quite frankly a strange character, but it works in her favour. Making up one half of the Nao and Mishima duo, these two are inseparable for the whole time they're together. While Nao isn't as out there in comparison to Mishima, you see traces of it here and there in certain moments of the game. Her dependence on Mishima is written incredibly well, as when he's forcibly removed from her, she has to learn how to cope without him. She isn't able to cope at all in the beginning, hurting others in the process, forcing Keiji and Sarah to confront her. But further along in the game, she comes to terms with Mishima's passing, and turns her energy into resolve to move forward. She's an incredibly strong-hearted character, even if she can't see it in herself. On the tier list, Nao is being placed at a B. Nankadai probably regretted killing this character off as early as he did, because not only was he brought back 3 whole times, but he even got an entire spin-off game dedicated with him as the main character. Though to be honest, I get it, he's pretty great. Despite being the first character to die by a long shot and hardly having any proper screen time, Fushima probably has one of the largest impacts on the team's development. Acting not only as Nao's mentor and inspiration, but as one of Jin's father figures, Fushima works hard to bring joy to the other participants, even if that happiness isn't reciprocated. Fushima dies so early in an attempt to keep everyone safe during the practice round, as he sensed danger, but didn't want anyone to hurt each other. Even after death, Fushima is just trying to help everybody, especially now, in the form of an artificial intelligence, which really shows how pure his intentions are, and it really makes you cheer for him every single time he's referenced in the story. This gets him a ranking of A tier. Kai, by nature, is an incredibly mysterious and strange character, but not quite in the same way that Keiji and Nao are. Because Kai doesn't speak very often, it's quite hard to get a read on what his character is thinking during any given scene, which isn't helped by the lack of facial expression in his sprites. Kai uses this to an advantage, as he's hiding vital information about the death game, and because of his aloof personality, he's not questioned for anything that he may know. When you realise Kai's personal connection to Sarah, it brings an incredible amount of tension. Having a character nearby that knows so much about you, yet you can't ask why. Unfortunately, Kai does die quite early in the game, but because his personality isn't as much on display as Joe or Mishima, he's only really mentioned when referring to his status or referring to his laptop. While Kai is a good character, it would have been nicer to see more of a contribution that he makes rather than the items that he owns. For that, he gets a C on the tier list. First and foremost, Rekko can and will beat the shit out of you, and we love her for it. Rekko adopts the personality of someone who is kind to the weak but harsh on the strong, which is demonstrated in the game by her trying to protect the more vulnerable characters, like Jin, Kana, and Nao. Rekko has her quirks, such as being quite fierce throughout a lot of the game, and yet being afraid of the dark, and having her prized possession be a pair of bongos, gifted to her early in her life by her brother Alice. Rekko's arc from resenting her brother and being quite angry at the world, to eventually forgiving Alice, albeit a little bit too late, and moving on is quite satisfying and yet heartbreaking to see, and can be entirely missed depending on which Yabusame you choose to live, and if you choose to do the bongos retrieval side quest. For her part in the story, Rekko deserves a B ranking. Alice Yabusame, otherwise known as Gonbi Yamada the Salesman if you're incredibly gullible, is the last character you're introduced to as the survivors. Depending on how you play the game, he might only survive for a single chapter's worth of time, and yet he has a brilliant amount of character to make up for it. Alice is an incredibly eccentric character, referring to others as their full names or nicknames that he makes up for certain characters. A lot of his character development is trying to find forgiveness and atonement from Rekko for the murder that he committed, and trying to convince the other characters to maintain their relationships. He does this because he used to be incredibly close to Rekko in his childhood before the murder was supposedly committed. If he dies in chapter 2, his arc wraps up quite satisfyingly with Rekko finally apologising to him and acknowledging him as her brother, and if he lives, he gets to discover the truth behind his murder case, finally giving him peace of mind. For having two amazing individual stories, Alice deserves no less than A tier. Where do I even begin with this guy? Kyotaro has quite possibly one of the best development arcs in the game, going from a character willing to sacrifice others to ensure his own victory, to a character willing to sacrifice himself to save others. Closer to the beginning of the game, Kyotaro acts as a realist, enacting the controversial topics, such as who to entrust the roulette gun to, who to sacrifice in the main games, and if he should sacrifice himself in the token game. For a good chunk of the game, Kyotaro acts in his own interests for his own survival, but that changes once he experiences the verge of death himself. Once this happens, he dedicates the remaining time that he has to making sure everyone works together no matter what. He even uses his physical body as bait for the enemy as a sacrifice. Kyotaro is not a perfect human, but he truly acts out of the best of his heart, and always does what he thinks can help the most people, even if that means helping himself first. For such a brilliantly written character, he deserves no less than an S tier ranking. Shin as a character makes you want to pull your hair out, and that's exactly what it wants. As opposed to most of the participants in the game, Shin doesn't particularly care for bringing the team together and keeping the feelings of others intact. Shin is willing to use anyone in order for him to achieve anything he wants, frequently lying about anything so long as it benefits him. He's constantly pressing Sarah's sanity as a rival, and he frequently undoes the trust that Sarah works so hard to build with everyone, such as his claims to be the Keymaster in the first trial. It's frequently hinted at that Shin knows a lot more about the death game than he's letting on, as he often does or says things that he couldn't have possibly had the information if he were just a regular participant. Shin's relation to the death game is interesting to watch as it slowly unfolds during the story, securing him a B ranking. The very last character of the initial beginning cast, Kana probably reacts the most realistically to a death game, by screaming and crying. When she isn't screaming, crying, or speaking in the third person, she acts as a sidekick to Shin. Kana feels as if she's in debt to Shin for saving her life via ensuring she doesn't get the sacrifice card, but she only feels this way as she was being manipulated by Shin himself. Interestingly though, even when Shin isn't in a position to manipulate Kana, she chooses to watch over Shin regardless, as she genuinely believes that he's a good person. Kana fears Sarah for a large portion of the game, and while the audience is originally led to believe it's because she's working with Shin, it's actually because she sees Sarah as the sister that she lost in her first trial. While Kana isn't a bad character, she does feel she'd be appropriately placed around the C tier. Miley is the definition of a girl boss, if your definition includes making children cry in fear to the point where they piss their pants. Miley is the first floor master that you run into during the game, enacting her role with pride. Known as the laughing doll, she enjoys sneering and giggling at the participants as they struggle through their trials, finding enjoyment in taking their lives when a participant is voted for the most. Despite what the name implies, she's not actually a doll, and Kai demonstrates this when he attacks her with a frying pan and makes her bleed. Despite her sadistic nature, she works sometimes at the aid of Sarah, handing her internal documents from the death game at one point. Miley lands herself a C on the tier list. It really wouldn't be surprising if Ranger was there to greet you at the gates of hell. Known as the dress-up doll, Ranger is an actual doll created entirely from negative emotions. Ranger is the floor master of the second floor, along with Tia Sapphin in place of Miley. If a participant dies, Ranger makes sure to steal a piece of clothing that they wore, as he says he loves wearing clothes from those who have suffered before their demise. He only exists for half a chapter, but because of his unrelenting presence, it certainly feels like he exists for a lot longer. Because of the fact that his full utilization within the game is cut short by this, he lands himself a D on the tier list. Tia Sapphin has one of the best character designs in the game, and this will not be debated. Despite being the floor master known as the Crying Doll, she does give the participants a lot of assistance. Sapphin gives off the appearance of a weak character who's too scared to do anything, but when she wants to be, she can be one of the most terrifying characters in the game. While she does offer to suppress the appearances of Hallucination Joe, if you rely on it too much, she'll make you her slave, having complete control of Sarah's existence. She certainly is the most willing floor master to help out the cast. However, she only does it in very specific circumstances, such as Kyotaro's final trick in Russian roulette. For the role that she plays, she gets herself a B on the tier list. Father to Kai, Gashu has to win the award for the worst father of the year. As well as being the father of Kai, he also built and let Rearranger become the way he was, which he rewards by outright shooting him in the head and kicking it off. Known as the Receptionist Doll, he serves the purpose of letting the main characters buy prizes from the prize exchange, as well as overseeing the second main game in place of Ranger. Gashu has dedicated his life to the main cause of the death game, being a researcher into negative emotions and making sure that Ranger was filled only with them, as according to him, negative traits are what make people human. Upon the discovery of the discrepancy made by Gashu when he changes who was supposed to receive the sacrifice card, he makes the ultimate commitment to the organisation by taking his life in order to keep the main game going. As a man who really commits to his role, he gets a B on the tier list. I know, he's not exactly popular, but you do have to admit he's an interesting character. The first of the dummies, this walking marshmallow acts as Sarah's partner in Chapter 3. Depending on the route that you take, Ranmaru can act in different ways. If you pick Kana to survive in Chapter 2, Ranmaru acts generally neutral towards Sarah and the rest of the cast. At one point, he considers getting rid of the rest of the cast, but Sarah makes sure that he doesn't go through with that plan no matter what. He does still go ahead with tasing Keiji, but at the very least the core cast is okay. If you pick Shin to live, however, Sarah won't attempt to stop Ranmaru getting rid of the cast, which will result in you losing the remaining yabasabi you have to survive. Despite his actions in the later half of the game, he sticks by Sarah's side no matter what decisions are made, for better or for worse. Because of this, he gets a C tier. Otherwise known as the human punching bag, Shinsuke Hayasaka is the dummy that's partnered with Jin. By nature, he's usually picked on by the rest of the cast because of his timidness, which becomes a running joke within the game. Jin tends to pick on Hayasaka a lot, however he does it endearingly because he sees him as one of his father figures. Because of the attire that he wears, especially the glasses and the suit, Jin is reminded of Mishima when he sees Hayasaka, making him want to protect him. Hayasaka distributed the personal information of everyone in the death game, however, he was forced to do it by Asanaru. Despite how others and the game treats him, he does his best to keep going regardless, and because of that, he gets a B tier. Known as a demon child from hell, Hinako is a dummy partnered with Keiji. Hinako is a tough-as-nails 12-year-old who makes sure everyone knows she doesn't care for what's happening. She spends a lot of the death game simply existing, trying not to stand out as she doesn't want particularly too much attention. There's always an air of mystery surrounding her as she refuses to share any of the information that she knows, not to mention the fact that she seemingly knows where all the hidden runes are despite being a supposed victim. You learn this is because she is in fact a replacement for the real Hinako that works for Asanaru, though she's drilled to bits before you can ask her any real proper questions. As fun as her attitude can be, her only real contribution to the story is that she's a stand-in character for a character that we never met, and because of that, she gets an E tier. I genuinely cannot express with words my disdain for Anzu. Anzu is the dummy partnered with whichever Yabasami you still have alive, dressing as a clown due to her job that she takes in her free time. Because of the fact that Anzu can die right after the introduction of the dummies from the first obstructor attack, she isn't given anything to say or do that'll majorly affect the plot, otherwise it would cause a lot of trouble for the script of the game. Anzu's personality comes off as quite eccentric and whiny, and because she never grows or contributes to the plot, she feels nothing more than like a thorn in your side. Because Anzu's only real role is to be a character with a victim video and to be a partner dummy, she gets an F tier. Moving on to a lighter note, Mai is a character with incredible character development. When you're introduced to her, she comes off as quite bubbly and innocent, with a constant smile on her face. Being the dummy partner with Kyotaro, she's constantly doing cutesy things that make her seem like less of a threat, until she reveals through the camera footage that it was an act to get Kyotaro to trust her, so she could stab him. Despite being the moment that puts a timer on Kyotaro's remaining lifespan, it acts as a catalyst for both of their personal growths and character developments. When Kyotaro forgives Mai for stabbing him and sympathizing with her situation as she was essentially forced to do so by Midori, Mai realizes what she needs to do as an ally to the living participants. She does everything within her path to help them, playing a big role in Kyutaro's final trick. She learns to lower her guard around the rest of the participants, living or dummies, only keeping it up when hiding vital information to help trick Midori. Mai is only around for the first half of the third chapter, yet she has a brilliant story filled with tense moments, character development, and incredibly heartfelt scenes, and for that, she deserves no less than an S tier. The final character of the dummies, Naomichi Kuramada, is another character with great development. Partnered with either Kana or Shin depending on who you let survive in Chapter 2, Kuramada generally has a distaste for his partner, comparing looking after Kana to babysitting and to generally being annoyed by Shin's presence. Kuramada initially has no interest in helping the surviving participants, or even his peer dummies, acting quite hot-headed toward every situation. During an encounter with Maypole during the chapter, he sacrifices himself for the safety of everyone, blowing a hole in his torso. After this happens, while his hot-headed personality still somewhat remains, he acts generally more selflessly towards the cast, such as offering to take the death tag from Ranmaru. Kuramada had a surprising amount of emotional depth for a character who was initially introduced as a character who didn't care for the fate of others, and for that, he earns himself a B tier. A character worthy of the title, the Joker of interactive visual novels, Midori is an incredibly sadistic yet zany character. Acting as the Floor Master in Chapter 3, Midori is feared by a lot of the living participants, as he has personal connections to them, him usually being the reason why they signed up for the death game. He especially has a connection with Shin, as they grew up together and he was even forced to take his scarf and the identity of So Hiyori, his original name, during the death game. Unlike the other Floor Masters, Midori seems to be more interested in making the third round as interesting as possible, as opposed to fair and impartial, starting random games of death tag and getting close and personal with participants, especially Sarah and Keiji. Midori states that the only way to win the floor is to kill him, and yet his strategy is unique. While he does run away, there are often times where he's nearby and talking to his supposed hunters, at one point even taking the lift with them. He often acts manipulative towards the character in an attempt to change the events of the scenario, such as goading Keiji to attack him, confessing his love to Maple in order to get her to fight for him, and striking a deal with Sarah in the final game of Russian roulette. For such a unique and unpredictable character throughout the entirety of his chapter, he deserves an A tier. And that concludes the ranking for every character. While maybe every character isn't exactly where you would have wanted them to be, Gashu, it doesn't mean you can't enjoy all the characters. Hell, even I understand the appeal of Anzu. The cast of Your Turn to Die is absolutely brilliant and should be celebrated as such, however you choose to. What did you think of the rankings that I made, and what would you change? Let me know. Cheers for watching, and have a good day.